Hello.
So everybody who's joining live, I decided to bring Mark on here, Marc Koehler. Well, number one, I highly respect him. Number two, he has had me on his show a couple different times, and each time I was always so curious to dive into the background. So Mark is a former U.S. submarine officer, and he's speaking kind of like I am in writing books. But I just think that when we think of this idea of caring leadership, and we talk about self leadership, I always want to find out, what does this look like on a submarine? And
Yeah.
what does this look like in leadership? And especially when we think about hard and soft, or we think about, you've got to have results, you got to expect clear accountability, you got to get people up to get stuff done. And at the same time, how do we lean into caring for people? How do we show people,
Right.
that they matter on a submarine? I mean, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So, Mark, thank you so much for joining. And tell everybody else like a little bit more about that, a little bit more about your background when it comes to that.
Yeah. So I'm from Rochester, New York. And in 1986, there's this little known movie that came out. Probably heard of it. It's called Top Gun. I was a junior studying physics at the State University of New York in Fredonia. And I saw the movie 3 times in 3 days. And I was in the recruiting office in Buffalo, New York, going through all the tests that day to figure out how to become a jet fighter pilot, sitting there at the end of the day. And the recruiter comes out and says, "Wow, you did great on all of the tests, but one." And I said, what didn't I do well on? He goes, "Well, we just have to retake it." And so he said, "Your thigh bone's 3/8 of an inch too long to sit in a jet." We got it down to 1/8 of an inch, but I got disqualified from flying. Now, all my dreams were crushed as I was leaving the recruiting officer. I think the recruiter needed one more, recruit that month. And he was just like, "What about helicopter pilot?" I was like, "No." "What about SEAL team?" "No." "What about surface ship?" "No." And he said, "What about elite nuclear submarine force?" And somehow the word elite, I turned my head around. I go, "Send me some stuff on it." So he sent me some information on it. And I have to tell you, Heather, I was a combination of intrigued, but I was a combination also very intimidated. It's a really hard engineering program to go through. And so I decided to join the nuclear submarine force. And I went through the first 18 months, you're on land. And so I'm in a simulator for like maybe an hour a day. And I'm 6'5". You can't tell that. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out how to be in these cramped, closed spaces. But I finally get to the submarine 18 months later, and I was cursing the recruiter because now it was, 10 months of every year you're on the submarine under the surface of the ocean, with 110 other people from different parts of the country, average age 23 years old. And so it was this tremendous teaching that I had on land, 18 months, and then over 3 years on a operational fast attack nuclear submarine.
Oh my goodness! It's like for me, like obviously people have been there, but for those of us who haven't, like what? And then I guess in that regard too. So kind of, what was your trajectory? So you're in that place, and
Sure.
then do you have like who are under your command? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. So when I reported to the USS Pogi, we were in the shipyard up in Bremerton. We brought the submarine out of the shipyard. Now that's a pretty scary evolution because there's 5 huge holes that are in the submarine. I'm talking about like 20 by 20 foot holes that you have to weld up, and you're going down to this test depth and you're trying to make sure water doesn't flood into the people tank. But I came down and I was a junior officer on board. I was responsible for, as the main propulsion assistant, I had 30 people in my division. Now there's only 110 people on board the submarine. And so I had 30 people. We were responsible for every piece of mechanical equipment on the submarine: nuclear power plant, secondary steam system, anything that was mechanical. 2,500 valves are in the submarine, 150 miles of piping, everything that's included. So I initially did that. And then you qualify. I think that's what the Navy did a really good job of. Is they have this tremendous training system. You qualify for different things. And then I moved from that position. I became the communications officer. Then I was responsible for all the communications, all the top secret communications we would receive every 12 hours from Washington, D.C., directing us where to go and what to do. I was responsible for looking at that and making sure it got to the captain and all of those things. So those were my 2 jobs on the submarine.
Oh my goodness! And so, what role did in your mind? Because especially when there's 110 on something so critical like that, what do you think like your biggest learning as it relates to teamwork in that environment? I'm curious.
Yeah, when I left the Navy, and I brought this really powerful experience and framework that I had. I became an interim turnaround CEO. And when I went into my first opportunity, I tried to use a bunch of big business tools, Heather, to help turn that company around. And I found out that they didn't work. And what it forced me to do is reflect back on my time in the submarine force. And so that reflection was really powerful because when I think back, like, how do we get 110 people to operate $1 billion piece of equipment? Now it's a $3 billion piece of equipment. 10 months of the year under the surface of the ocean, average age 23 years old. I mean, wildly disruptive environments underneath the surface of the ice, delivering SEALs close in a lot of other scenarios that I can't
Yeah.
talk about. So how did we get that, do that? There were really two keys to our success when I peeled everything back. Number one is that everyone was viewed as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason for that is 400 people on the surface of the ocean. When a fire breaks out in the engine room, the person responsible for leading the team when the fire breaks out is the person closest to the fire when it breaks out. So whether you've been on board for 3 days or 3 years, we needed to know whether you could step in, step up, and lead. So that's the number one key that I found. And over the past 35 years, I get asked this question all the time about leadership. Is leadership something that a few people are born with, or is it something that we learn? And my answer is it's yes to both of those, but with one caveat. Because I don't believe a few of us are born with leadership. I believe every person's born with a leadership toolkit inside. And it turns out it's not what we don't have, it's what we don't use. And that was my experience over the past literally 35 years, being on elite level teams and helping to develop countless other elite level teams. This is the number one ingredient of those teams. Everyone is viewed as a leader and everyone views themselves as a leader. I'll just add one more thing here. We can't just take leadership pixie dust and throw it on people and go, wow, you're a leader, right? But there's a set of leadership skills and tools from the submarine force that I created a framework called Fast Attack Leadership that people can learn. And what it does is we have to open up people's minds first, because this, Heather. A lot of people go, I'm not a leader. I wasn't born a leader. We have to have this conversation with them first. I see you as a leader, and I want you to view yourself as a leader. And once we do that, then they open up their minds. And then we can take and start developing leaders at every single layer of the organization. So I would say that is the number one ingredient. That's the mindset shift.
Love it.
If you're working with a company that has 100 employees and you would describe that as 10 leaders leading 90 people, think about that company versus a company that has 100 leaders. Which one's going to win in the long run? It's the one with 100 leaders.
Yeah. Interesting. One of the things I was thinking of is, since it sounds like there wasn't a formal leadership role, although a formal leadership title, there's always a formal leadership role, again, for everybody in that submarine.
Yeah.
Was there something in you? Because I venture to guess this. I don't know if everybody on there was like you, because to me, you already seemed like you were like the commander, or like the submarine leader. But was everybody on there like that? Just because there had to be a certain such a level of, there was the team idea, but there was a self-reliance idea. Like I have to own my part in how this thing is going and how we direct it and to minimize the fires and all of that.
Yeah.
I just know more about the mix of everybody that was there.
Yeah. I mean, everyone looks at me now and goes like, hey, you have command at the stage and all that stuff. That wasn't me as a young man. I mean, seriously, like, I was shy. I always wanted to have the right answer. And that's why I went into physics, and because 2 + 2 is always 4, Heather. It wasn't like write a story about a tree and an apple and there's a fire and I'd write something and someone go, oh, you got a D- on it because you didn't write it correctly. So that's why I went to that. So when I went in the submarine force, they had to really break me of that and go, hey, you're not going to have every answer exactly correct. And you have to be okay with that. And there's 2 schools that the 18 months make up before you even get to the submarine. One is a technical school. This is where you have to learn and earn a master's in nuclear engineering in 6 months. Now, typically takes 18 months to do that. And when you look at that, they're certainly trying to get us to the submarine very quickly. But that school was built to help me to learn how to learn. What are the things that I need to really pay attention to? And what are the other things that I can let go? That school, I barely passed that school. I mean, I was working 12 hours a day, to figure that out. The next school we went to, we took all that, and then they had a nuclear power plant on land up in Connecticut. And we actually ran a watch section. That school, I did fantastic because I was leading others. While others were having great success in the theoretical part of nuclear physics, I was able to then lead a watch section. So I actually, when I saw that and experienced it and saw how the other people were relating to, other peers of mine, that gave me some more confidence. And then it's being put, like, I was 25 years old, leading teams on missions critical to national security. Here's just one other thing, is that the framework of the nuclear submarine force is built to handle stressful situations over extended periods of time, but also built to help young people to thrive. Average crew today is 23 years old also, 130 crew members, 30 millennials leading 100 Gen Z.
Oh,
There's no baby boomers, there's no Gen X on board. And so I was at a very early age put in some tremendous situations. And what I can tell you is what I saw is that I couldn't do that alone. The Navy, they had a step ladder. And in 18 months, I went from not knowing anything about nuclear power to being qualified by the Department of Energy to run any nuclear power plant in the United States. Now, I didn't do that without that great ladder. But what it taught me was that if I can do it, then anyone can do it. And the Navy invested $1 million training me, and I'm saying I'm giving back taxpayer money by teaching fast attack leadership now. So I think people might look at me now, or they look at me when I stand on stage, and it's like, hey, I wasn't always like this.
that's interesting. I do love that, as we, in the context of self-leadership, number one, it being a journey, in that, so first, like the idea of ownership, that we have to kind of own how we show up. We have to be on that journey of continuous learning and kind of understand that we have to do things to help us learn how to learn, which I love that.
Yes.
That idea of like every member of the team that plays their role in that, and in that role, they're leading somebody. And I love the idea of the proximity. That's the most brilliant thing. I always tell people that, like in the customer experience or employee experience, it's like the person who's closer to the problem should be the one that helps you come to the solution. Darn it. Why is it always the people up here doing that? Come on, bring the other people along. So I love that. And then this idea of the evolution, and that you were put in positions to discover your strengths. You were put in positions for people to see you as a leader, and then for you to step into that leadership, and then you owned it. Because I think sometimes we may be put in a position, but we're not ready to own it, or maybe we don't show up in the way we want. And so self-leadership says, like, we need to not wait for someone else necessarily. I mean, some of your cases, they were green lights, but once someone opened the door, you fully went in, and then you owned that role fully as you were there. And then that's why you come out to be this man here who, like you said, stand 6'5", looked like you were the commander of the whole submarine. That's just crazy.
I want to share one other thing, is that first school, Learn How to Learn, when we got to the submarine, we had to qualify on every single system that was on board the submarine. There was over 200 systems that on the submarine. And as an officer, we had to draw every one. We had to know how they were all interconnected to one another. The 2,500 valves, I didn't know whether they failed open, failed shut, exactly where they were located, where they were powered. So we had to know a lot. There was no one on board teaching us that. There were manuals that were that thick that when you were done sitting your watch and you were done running your division, you had to self-learn. You had to open up the manual, and you had to go through and go, how do I draw this? How do I know it interacts with everything else? So we had to learn how to learn, but we had to do it on our own. There was no one that was saying, hey, we're going to sit down right now and I'm going to teach you this. And so that was extremely powerful, because, since that time, I do that every single day. I mean, reading books like all the time, whatever. I'm like always diving in. I think that's a key tool that all leaders should have, is that we're continually learning.
Yes, and I love it. Like you and I, when we're talking about leaders, like it really is a much more expansive view, and it's all about kind of the role, the shoes you stand in, and how you choose to show up, irrespective of who's like inviting you to do that. Like you're doing it on your own accord, which I love. Now, for those who are joining or those who are joining active live, you actually can comment. Just so you know, you can comment, you can ask a question for either one of us that are here, and then we can respond right as we're doing it. That's why it's a live stream. And then, of course, after the fact, this will be recorded. So anybody who watches it, you can still ask questions if you like afterward, but it won't be kind of like live response the way this is. So anybody who's out there who has a question of this former U.S. submarine officer, and just thinking about that, because just some of the things you described. I mean, so what were your biggest, the things that you like, the mind stuff, either yours and other people on the show, like what was the biggest mind shift you had to make it being in that role from like being on land, like everybody else that's here, everybody else living this life and you're living your life. What was your biggest thing you had to kind of overcome?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think I was too young to really understand the situation I was in. I mean, the biggest, fear that we have, the biggest enemy that we have is not another nuclear submarine. It's not a helicopter. It's actually the complacency of the crew. One person out of the 110, one time just saying, hey, I don't have to do the maintenance on that equipment. It hasn't shut down for the last 2 years. One person saying, hey, we're down at this. I don't have to check that. Just one person could take all 109 other people down to a watery grave. And so I think the thing when I walked through the submarine, it was that everything that we walked by had consequences. And walking past the nuclear weapons, like one U.S. submarine is considered the sixth most powerful nuclear nation in the world. A coffee cup has consequences. The coffee cup falls on the ground and hits the hull. It could emit a sound that we lose our stealth. And so, I think that's one of the biggest things is that you can't have any complacency. I think that was number one. Number two is emotions spread. So when I was in the control room and I was leading a watch section, 9 people who were then connected to 34 other people, is that when we had, something come up and it was a life and death situation with another submarine, I could either be very calm and cool, which everyone else would look at and go like, okay, Mr. Koehler's calm and cool, so we're going to be calm and cool. If I freaked out, like inside though, Heather, I was freaking out. Like I was just going like what the, yeah, and I'm sitting there all stoic and everything. But if I freaked out, that would go to the 9, and then that would go to the 34. And so it was this need to understand that your emotions spread. And what's really powerful about that and how I've used that is that, every single day when I show up, when I'm interacting with my team, I can either have a really positive interaction. Doesn't mean you can't address issues and failures, or I can have fear spread. And so I think those were the two biggest things that I learned and had to shift my mindset on.
Oh boy, that emotion spread thing is crazy. I mean, that is so true. And I think there's a lot of leaders don't quite understand the impact that they have, and that it could be both. I call it positive power, or that's kind of like not so great power. And I think in this case, in your case too, especially, again, there's a role you play, and it's positional to a certain extent, but it's not necessarily from an authority perspective. But that positional place you're at almost puts you in authority for the job function you're doing. But then having that awareness, and like you said, like there's so many times where there's firecrackers going around, coming in through our gut, and then at the same time, when that's happening, when we feel that, but we don't want to show it all, and it's so hard not to show it on the face because if you're thinking outside yourself, which I just think most people don't, I think that's the part that's hard. It's like I think most leaders don't understand that. It looks like we have a question here from Big Matt. It says, "What are the most important qualities that a leader of a submarine needs?"
Yeah.
Curious to know what you think on that.
Yeah, fantastic question. So I talked about a couple of those but I think, the number one thing that I look at when I think about the submarine to leaders today and what's needed, I have a 5-step framework, and the number one pillar is always connecting people to the mission. In the submarine force, it was really important that everyone felt deeply connected to the mission. And they didn't just know the mission, but they felt the mission. So it was really important that we did that first. I talked about earlier on complacency setting in. When you're sitting there and you're going like, hey, in the last 18 hours, I've only slept 16 hours. and have another watch section, because we were on 18-hour days, we weren't on 24-hour days. Going like, hey, I'm not going to skip that, or that's all about being connected to the mission, being connected to one another. I think this is something that too many leaders overlook. They just go like, hey, here's our mission statement, it's up on the wall. And I say, to connect to the mission, you don't just need to have people know the mission, you have to have them feel the mission. And I think on the submarine, it was every day we were always saying, when someone was saying, hey, that valve we were working on, hey, that valve is connected to the submarine, cooling system, which is connected to making sure that we can have 100% power, which is connected to making sure we can complete the mission. We always made that connection. And that was really important to do. I mean, if you're a leader today, every single day, you should be making these connections. And someone, when you get to the point where someone's like, oh crap, here comes Heather, she's going to create this like connect story, and they're almost throwing up, like that's when you've gone far enough. Because so that is number one. And here's why. Look, I've had so many experiences in my life where I've bought the next technology. I put together a process with the team, and we bought the CRM system. If our people don't give a crap about their job and they don't feel that they're connected to making a difference in the world, I mean, all that stuff is way less powerful. And then there's all these stats, there's much higher levels of resiliency and agility. And, 85% of people will stay with a company 5 years if they're connected to the mission. So when I talk about 5 pillars, I give this in an hour. I spend 20 minutes on connect to the mission. Because Heather, if you get that right, and whoever asked that question, if you get that right, everything else becomes a lot easier. So I think that's
so good. I was thinking about this. I don't think I went as far on the sort of self-leadership book to delve into values, and I think this kind of is that this is very, very closely aligned. Whereas, like, I looked at it and I'm like, wait a second. Why didn't I as I've been speaking, since I've been on your podcast and all these people's podcasts, I've been talking about it, and I'm like, wait a second, I didn't go deeply enough, because I do think this idea of, understanding our values individually, our values or the mission, the whole focus organizationally. I think it's probably the most important thing, which is like, I decided like, that's the thing I'm going to be leading out front with. I have to, because I agree with you. Like 40% of it is that. And then once you have that, all the other things start to fall in play. Like you were saying, if they know what the mission is, then that coffee cup that falls, like everybody's going to run and grab it, so that they don't have the echo that happens that then creates the reverberation that then other people can hear and that can put you all at risk. So I think it does make all the other things downstream take place once you're so super duper clear on what your mission, values, all those things are. It's crazy.
I'll just add, for people to know, the complexity of submarine is made up of 4 million components. And so think about 4 million components. If you had a manual that was how you did everything in every situation come up, and we did have a lot of manuals for everything. But if you had to have for every situation come up every day, Heather, like everyone would have to have a manual this thick. And then by the time they followed a manual and go, hey, what's going on? So what we made really clear and sure was that everyone was deeply connected to the values. And I lean on a quote from Roy Disney. And Roy Disney said, when your values are clear, your decisions are easy. I think like these are the types of things that we should do. When someone says, hey, why did that happen? And someone says, hey, I was really striving for excellence. And they can really prove that, and that's one of your values, like they can lean on that to be able to have success that day. So everything was about, in the submarine force was about simplicity, even though we had the most advanced technology in the world.
Love that so much. So for those who are joining, like either just came in a little bit late, I have him speaking to Marc Koehler, and he is a former U.S. submarine officer, and he and I are both colleagues, and I've been on his show. But I was like, I've always been super curious, partly because actually, well, I think you might know, I mentioned this something to you, but I have a son who's looking at potentially going into one of the academies, potentially Naval Academy, and so now it's like my curiosity's peaked, but also I'm just kind of I feel like I'm a social psychologist. I'm always just like so interested in to understand the inner workings of what goes on in the leader's mind and in the different areas. And it would be the first time I've ever spoken to someone who was an officer on a submarine. I think that is, boy, that when we think about the stresses or having resilience or just bearing down and then having to still show with like the brilliance and the brightness and the caring and all this stuff I talk about, this would be the place it'd be hardest to do. So now I'm curious to just ask you this question.
Sure.
In that environment, so let's say whoever was, let's say, the leader of the submarine, how do you feel the differences in leadership may show up like in that environment? And I'm not saying necessarily a specific person, but kind of when we think about soft and hard.
Yeah.
Did you see it still being effective to show up on that kind of softer side, the more empathetic side, the compassionate side in that environment? And if so, in what kind of circumstances did you see that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think a lot of people watch a military movie and they see the Marine who's like telling everyone to like, go, and they're yelling at people and all that type of stuff. It's the exact opposite in the submarine force. Like a lot was expected of us. Tremendous amount was expected of us. But we always knew deep down that we were the number one priority on the submarine. And here's why. We had the most advanced technology in the world. And we used that most advanced technology, but none of it was going to work unless we had a crew that were deeply connected with relationships to one another. And so I want you to think of, Heather, of an organization that comes together. And there's 110 people in it, all from all different parts of the United States, all different backgrounds, upbringings, political beliefs. You're put into this cramped tube for 10 months of the year. And there's 33% turnover every year because everyone on the submarine changes out every 3 years, even the captain of the submarine. So how do you get this environment where people come to the submarine and you're creating these very strong relationships with one another? Now, the captain of a U.S. nuclear submarine, what percentage of decisions do you think the captain is involved in on a daily basis? What would you say, Heather? Just roughly.
40%?
Yeah, less than 1%. Yeah. So the captain of a U.S. submarine is spending all of their time working on the business, 99% on the business of the submarine, only 1% in it. Now, when you're working on your business, you have more opportunity to have those conversations, to walk through the submarine, to, hey, how's your wife doing? Hey, all of these different things. So the ability, so many of us are working so much in the business that we don't have time to be able to do that. So I would say that is like one of the number one things is that the captain, although he knew every single answer, he never told me the answer. I'll just tell you one example here. We're getting ready to leave out of San Diego, and we have to leave at 1300. Captain and I are at the top. I'm going to take the submarine out. He's just monitoring everything. And he says to me, he says, Mr. Koehler, what's the status of the submarine? I said, Captain, at 12:57, I said, the captain, the submarine's ready to get underway, permission to get underway. And he says to me, Mr. Koehler, what time are we supposed to get underway? I say 1300. And then he asked me another question. What time is it right now? I say it's 12:57. And then he says, so should we get underway? And I go, no. When should we get underway, Mr. Koehler? I say 1300. So it was that type of, he had that time to be able to ask questions. And then he took his mindset when he did that and he transferred it to me. Now, I can't tell you all of the other things that are top secret and all the different warfare scenarios, but that's what it was like. It was like a classroom. He never answered a question. Very few times. There's only 3 things we needed permission from the captain. Go out of depth zone, fire a torpedo, and believe it or not, any change to the menu. Because the menu was our connection back to home. And if someone thought, hey, we're going to have meatball stew this afternoon, and it changes to hamburgers, and someone flips out because they're like, I was looking for meatball stew. So I would say I always knew that the captain really, really cared for me. And it was through those interactions that he was always teaching me.
That is so interesting. I don't know about anybody else listening. Anybody else listening on here just kind of like, wait, what? Like a little shocked. I was not expecting that. Number one, I was expecting him to be more hands-on. And number two, this concept, especially when it comes to most all other leaders who are in corporate America, like they don't have time. That is part of the biggest thing they say is they don't have the time. And in most cases, it is so hard. They're having to like really shift and move things around because there's so much on their plate about being in the business.
Right.
So in this case, it's like, dang it, but the submarine leadership structure, they have it all right. And we on the outside absolutely have it wrong. And I can see, and then like, so then that environment is that in my mind, in the study I've done, right, of leadership, is the environment that makes it more fruitful. And so if you can insert more spaces where people have time to connect and to be with it, one another and to get to know one another, then it does allow you to express the care and concern more. It's when we stuff their schedules with all the junk that makes it really, really hard for them to be those leaders.
Let me share with one tool that might be helpful for the listeners today is that I always tell CEOs and leaders, I share with them, I said, every question that you get asked, you have the same answer back to the person. You don't answer their question, you ask them, what do you think? And when you do that, they've done studies to show that the person then, their mindset enters into a different framework. It goes from just hearing stuff and being downloaded on, which they don't remember. It takes their mindset into a thinking mindset. And then when you go through that entire step and scenario, keep asking questions. It's called guided decision making. You never can answer the question. You always guide them there with a decision. But I always tell people, if you want to have people learn, you want to transfer your knowledge and skills down, every question you get asked, you answer with the same question back is, what do you think?
I love that. Well, number one, because again, I think by saying, what do you think? Number one, you invite them in. So you don't, so then you're not imposing just your will on them. You're not, the intimidation factor goes down. So you're creating more of that safety. And then also, when you wait to speak last, you then can find more solutions that you probably didn't think of if you spoke first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so powerful. I tell you, about 80% of the time I already know the answer, and it should be option A, and
Yes.
but when you get to the end, you go, well, what decision should we make? And they say option A, then you leave the decision making with them, and they feel like, oh, I made a decision, versus you being the one who's joysticking, right?
Oh,
And making
yeah.
decisions for them. And then what you get to do as a leader, you get to go, that's a great decision.
Oh, I love that so much.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for giving us this like just peek into this life. I think you and I could, to be honest, I could be like on here for another 2 hours because I could continue to ask you questions because it's just my curiosity factor is really high right now. I'm just like, and tell me more, and tell me more. For those who are joining, definitely make sure that you follow Marc. His work is compelling, and his storytelling, his podcast, all those things. But I just wanted to put this out here as a way to help us think differently about leadership, our role as strong self-leaders with or without a title. And at the same time, boy, like it just opened my mind. So hopefully your mind was open to think that what we assume about one environment and how it might be fruitful and fertile for leadership may not be true. And maybe we're the ones who need to learn a lot. So I don't know about you, but I'm gonna be digging into this kind of work and this background and this type of leadership as well. So thank you for coming on here, Marc.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, no, it's my favorite topic is to talk about leadership. And same thing, I could talk for the next 2 hours, but should probably get back, right?
I really value and appreciate you. Hopefully everybody else, like I said, has a great day. Follow Marc, and again, you can share this when this will be live on LinkedIn and wherever else you're listening. So you can always share this far and wide. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Marc. Appreciate you.